Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you very, very much for that warm reception. Kevin, thank you for that very kind introduction. It's great working with you, and I appreciate the great work that you do. I have to say congratulations to Fred Anton and Loman Henry for putting together another terrific conference. This is just outstanding. I'll tell you, it is really encouraging and gratifying for me when I get to come here, as I have actually many years now, and see the strength and the vibrancy and the intensity and the passion of the conservative movement in Pennsylvania. So thank you for being here. Thank you for keeping this movement alive and well and strong. I got a couple of things I wanted to touch on today, and the first is a little bit of a victory lap. Can I just tell you how nice it is that Harry Reid is the Senate Minority Leader? I mean, seriously? And I have to say, now this is important. Senator Reid had made a very conscious decision to shut down the Senate, to close the institution, to prevent legislation from moving, to not allow votes. And really, it was a terrible, terrible abrogation of responsibility to turn the United States Senate into an extension of the political shop of the White House. And that's what it was. And one of the things that we said, we Republican candidates running for the Senate last fall, guys like me helping a campaign on behalf of some of those candidates, is we said if we're given the opportunity to govern, if we're given the majority, we're going to reopen the Senate. And we're going to make it a constructive, functioning body doing the work that the people of America have sent us to do. And, ladies and gentlemen, we have done exactly what we promised. We've reopened the Senate. You know, first thing we did was we put the Keystone Pipeline on the Senate floor, and we opened it up for debate. To give you a sense of contrast, in all of calendar year 2014, Senator Reid permitted a grand total of 14 votes on amendments on the Senate floor, 14 roll call votes, 14 in a whole year. We put the Keystone Pipeline on the Senate floor and we opened it up for amendment on a single day. We had 16 votes. After about 25 votes and about the third time the Democrats had us voting on some variation on climate change, we said, this looks like this has been about enough, and we used the procedural tool to try to cut off debate. And they said, no, you can't do that. We haven't had enough amendments. But the fact is we got through it. We passed that legislation. We sent it to the president's desk, and predictably he vetoed that, but we can't control what the president does. What we can do is pass constructive pro-growth legislation, and that's what we've been doing. You know, just a couple of weeks ago we passed a budget, and it's not perfect, but, you know, there's a statute that requires Congress to pass a budget, which shouldn't be too shocking. After all, we run the biggest enterprise in the world, a $4 trillion a year operation. Yeah, maybe it's a good idea to have a budget. Senator Reid didn't think so. For years, there was no budget. But we passed a budget that doesn't raise anybody's taxes, it gets to balance, and it gives us the procedural mechanism to repeal Obamacare. That's not a bad start, in my view. But what I really want to talk about tonight is something that I think is going to require Congress to play a more assertive role than it has in recent decades, frankly. Certainly the Senate, but I think all of Congress. And that is, frankly, I think we need to play a stronger, more assertive role in national security and foreign policy, given the conduct of this administration. Here's the thing. I really think it's pretty fair to conclude that the president's views about America's role in the world are not consistent with the majority of Americans' views, and it's not consistent with what I think is a consensus within Congress. And specifically, the president's made this pretty clear. It appears that he doubts whether America has the moral authority to be the leader of the free world that we have been for so many decades. The president doesn't believe in American exceptionalism. He has said so. You remember early in his presidency, his apology tour when he went around bowing to foreign heads of states and apologizing for what America had done. It seemed that he thought that the reason we had difficulties in our relationships in past years with countries like Russia and Venezuela and Cuba, the reason was because of flaws in American behavior and American administrations. And so this president has been determined and, in fact, has been pursuing a policy of retreat. His strategy has been to withdraw America from our influence in the world, to diminish our role, to abscond from a leadership position that we've played in the past. And folks, when America creates a vacuum by stepping away, other countries perceive that, and they step into that vacuum. And what's happening all around the world is that countries who are hostile to American interests, who don't share our values, they have been stepping into the vacuum that this president has created. We see it with Chinese aggression on territorial claims in the Western Pacific. We saw it outrageously when Russia just invaded a neighboring sovereign state and annexed part of that country. And we certainly see it with Iran as Iran rampages through the Middle East. This was predictable. In fact, it was predicted. And now it's happening. And I think the worst of these problems is this path we seem to be on towards what is, folks, it's a very, very bad deal with Iran. That's what I'm concerned about. So let me talk about this. And we can base this isn't based on speculation anymore. The administration has announced a framework. And if you look at this framework, I think it's impossible to conclude anything other than this is a very, very bad deal. And so Congress has to step up and play a role here and try to stop a very bad deal from taking place. Now, contrary to what the president tells us, the alternative to a bad deal doesn't have to be war. The alternative to a bad deal can be a better deal. And frankly, that should be the goal. Let me tell you why I think this is a bad deal and, in fact, a dangerous deal. There are a lot of reasons. I thought Benjamin Netanyahu summed it up quite fittingly when he said, the problem with this agreement is it does not block Iran's path to a nuclear bomb. It paves Iran's path to a nuclear bomb. And in fact, it does. I'll give you three categories of reasons. The first is there are way too many concessions have already been made. Secondly, we are dealing with a regime that fundamentally we cannot trust in Iran. And finally, the administration, while they say you don't have to worry about trust because we will verify and enforce, ladies and gentlemen, the snapback of sanctions that they have said we can achieve, this is a fantasy. This is not achievable. Let me just walk through these things. First of all, on the front of the concessions, before the discussions even began, this administration, our administration, made huge concessions to the Iranians. They conceded that the ongoing missile system, the very significant, advanced, and sophisticated missiles that Iran already has, the ongoing program to make them even more sophisticated, capable of delivering more dangerous loads, greater distances, that would be off the table, not even a subject of discussion. They conceded up front that the ongoing active financing and support for terrorist organizations, not even a topic of discussion. Iran could just continue that, unabated, unfettered. And finally, they conceded that they wouldn't ask Iran to make any statement whatsoever to acknowledge the right of Israel to exist. Instead, Iran still insists that they've got the right to wipe Israel off the map. It's amazing to me that we would have made those concessions right up front before the discussions even take place. The second thing that's pretty disturbing to me is how the administration has moved the goalposts. Now, in the fall of 2013, when the latest round of negotiations were kicked off, the president stood up and said, the goal here, the goal of these negotiations is to prevent Iran from having a nuclear bomb. That's the right goal. Unfortunately, it's no longer the goal. When the president's negotiators came before the Senate Banking Committee on which I sit, and we asked them, this is just a couple of months ago, but they're very public about this, we asked them, what is the goal of the negotiations? They said the goal of their negotiations is so that if Iran decides to have a nuclear bomb, we should have about a 12 months notice. That's a shocking concession right there. But probably the biggest concession that's most disturbing is the fact that it's already clear the framework that's been announced would allow Iran to retain so much of its nuclear infrastructure. They'd be able to retain the underground facility at Fordo, the plutonium reactor at Iraq. They'll be able to keep thousands of centrifuges. Folks, if all they want is a peaceful nuclear electricity program, they don't need any centrifuges at all. There's only one reason: they want to retain the right to, the ability to enrich uranium on an industrial scale. And now, frankly, I think we've got to worry about what the next round of concessions are going to be. I mean, think about how differently this agreement is being described by the two parties to the agreement, right? If you hear the administration's description and then you hear the Iranian regime's description, it's hard to believe they're talking about the same document. On sanctions, for instance, the administration says that sanctions will be lifted gradually, only as and when the Iranians demonstrate their compliance with the terms of the agreement. The Iranians say, oh no, the sanctions are all going to be lifted immediately when we sign the document. They're pretty far apart, it seems to me. On inspections, the administration says, we'll be able to conduct inspections anytime, anywhere. And the Iranians say, absolutely not. You'll conduct inspections only with permission and never at a military site. Folks, I'm pretty worried about what the next round of concessions are going to look like. But let's think about this regime that we're doing business with here. Can we really trust this regime? Now, fundamentally, it would be a different matter if I thought that the Iranian regime had come to the conclusion that for their own internal reasons, they genuinely wanted to abandon pursuing a nuclear weapon. Folks, I don't know about you, but I am convinced the Iranian regime has not decided that they want to abandon the 30-year quest that they have been on to obtain a nuclear bomb. And this is a regime that's been killing Americans since 1979. They've killed about 1,500 American soldiers in Iraq alone by making the very sophisticated and powerful IEDs that they designed, manufactured, and shipped into Iraq precisely so that they could kill Americans. This government in Iran is the world's foremost sponsor of terrorism. They're promoting radical Islam in many places throughout the Middle East. Recently, we discovered a plot on their part to try to assassinate the Saudi ambassador to the U.S. with a bomb in a Washington restaurant. They continue to declare their goal of wiping out Israel. And there's a history here. We don't have to just speculate. Iran has a well-documented history of cheating on other agreements, including agreements that are in force right now that they routinely cheat on. So really, we're supposed to believe that this time will be different? Well, the administration says, no, don't worry about that. You don't have to worry about trusting the regime because we'll have a bulletproof system of verification and enforcement, and if they ever cheat on this agreement, we'll just snap those sanctions right back in place. Well, let's think about this. First of all, how easy is it going to be to discover that they're cheating? Henry Kissinger and George Shultz had a very, very well thought through op-ed in the Wall Street Journal recently, and here's one of the points they made, and I quote, "In a large country with multiple facilities and ample experience in nuclear concealment, violations will be inherently difficult to detect." And the fact is, in this agreement, we're subbing out enforcement to, guess who? The UN. Populated somewhat with countries not terribly friendly to us. So not only is it going to be difficult to detect the violations, but we're going to have the burden of trying to prove them. Again, Kissinger and Shultz, discussing this, they said that when the cheating occurs, it's not likely to be a big, obvious, clear-cut, unambiguous event. Rather, it will likely be, quote, the gradual accumulation of ambiguous evasions. So think about this. If we're able to discover the cheating that is guaranteed to occur, what do we do about it? We'll have to go to the UN to convince them that we're right, while the Iranians will assuredly go there and say, oh, no, that's not true. And we will spend who knows how many months adjudicating whether or not the seal was broken on the door behind which the centrifuges were stored last time we knew. And then, even if we detect the cheating, we convince everybody at the UN that we're right and the Iranians are wrong and the cheating is taking place. Now we're told to believe the sanctions will come screaming right back and they'll be right back in place. Folks, I have a hard time believing that given the fact that the sanctions regime is crumbling right now. It's already coming apart and we don't even have an agreement signed. You saw the announcement, the Russians are selling anti-aircraft batteries, very sophisticated, powerful anti-aircraft batteries to the Iranians. And why are they doing that? To make the threat of a military deterrent much, much more difficult to achieve. Finally, the last big point that I would make on this. This agreement almost guarantees nuclear proliferation throughout the Middle East. There is no way that the Sunni Arab states are going to sit by idly while Iran is allowed to have a program that is going to let them develop nuclear weapons. There's no way it's going to happen. We know that. So we can very confidently predict that if this agreement is reached, Saudi Arabia, maybe Egypt, maybe even Turkey, other countries in this region are not going to leave themselves exposed to a nuclear-armed Iran, and so they will develop their own capabilities. And I can't think of any place in the world where I would less want to see the spread of nuclear weapons. And that's what I'm concerned about. So, folks, this is the context. This is the way I am looking at what is coming at us, and this is the reason that I believe it's absolutely essential that Congress have a say in this agreement. And this is, of course, as you know, a subject of great debate in Washington and an extremely controversial one. In my view, an agreement of this nature certainly rises to the level of importance that it ought to be deemed to be a treaty, and the Constitution is very clear. A treaty requires a two-thirds affirmative vote of the Senate in order to be confirmed. So that's what ought to be happening here. The President ought to have the hurdle of being able to convince two-thirds of the Senate. And if he's confident that he's got a good agreement that's going to help to keep America safer than it would otherwise be, he should be confident that he can convince the American people and get the two-thirds vote. Strikes me the President maybe doesn't have very much confidence in his ability to do that. And so he's insisting that Congress should have no role at all. No role whatsoever in this process. He intends not to present it to Congress as a treaty for ratification, but instead simply intends to sign an executive order and lift the sanctions. Here's the problem, folks. There's three categories of sanctions. There are sanctions that were imposed by the UN, there were sanctions that were imposed by executive order, and there were sanctions that were the result of a congressional action, legislation that the President signed. The Iranians will insist that all of those sanctions be lifted in return for this agreement. Well, the President has already said he will go to the UN and ask a UN vote to lift the sanctions. He'll get that vote. With respect to the sanctions that he signed himself, he's got the authority to rescind that. And tragically, the legislative sanctions that were passed by Congress were passed with a provision that gives the President of the United States the power to waive the sanctions if he deems it in the national security interest of the country. So existing law allows him to waive the congressional sanctions, thereby lifting all the sanctions, eliminating the sanctions regime, giving the Iranians everything they want, while we get left with all this risk. So it's in the context of that situation that we have legislation that has now passed the Congress, which is at least a step in the right direction. The legislation that came out of Foreign Relations Committee last week, and which will be voted on the Senate floor next week, I believe, says the President can't waive the sanctions for 30 days, and during that time, we're going to have an opportunity to examine this deal. The Congress will have access to the classified amendments and appendices so that we can evaluate everything in this agreement. And then we'll have an opportunity to pass a resolution of disapproval. Now, this is working backwards, right? The onus is going to be on opponents of the treaty to block the treaty, because we'll have to get the votes, if we oppose it, we'll have to get the votes to pass a resolution of disapproval. And if that passes and goes to the President, he'll surely veto it. We would then need 67 votes to override the veto. So rather than the affirmative obligation to get 67 votes in favor of the treaty, it's reversed. We'll need 67 votes to prevent the treaty from going into effect. First of all, I think we should make an attempt to amend this legislation so that there is a simple 67 affirmative vote need to affirm the deal. And we have to examine the deal. I'll read this thing and the dependencies that come with it. I want to make sure I understand it. But we already know an awful lot about where this is heading. If we can't force a better deal or block this one, there is one small consolation, and that is that without the benefit of any legislative action in the affirmative, this deal can be reversed by the next president, who is mercifully only 22 months away. But I think it's essential that we in Congress step up and play a role that Congress hasn't played in a long time, because this is the kind of consequence that follows from the president implementing his worldview, which is one of diminishing American authority. But let me comment on this, and I'll close on this thought. You know, sometimes when we look around the world and we see a loss of U.S. influence, we see a deterioration in security, including American security. We see America no longer leading where we historically have led. It might look to some as though America is a nation in decline. And I know that that's what our adversaries would like to think. Some in this country think that that's somehow inevitable. I say no. America is not a country in decline. We are unfortunately in a recent and temporary retreat. That's been imposed by the current administration, and it's entirely reversible. Here's the thing. There is nothing inevitable about a decline of a great power. I know some people don't agree with that, but I feel very strongly. There's nothing inevitable about history. You know, the future of America is entirely up to us. Whether America were to decline or to have an incredibly bright future, that's up to us. Now, I'm a big fan of the historian David McCullough, and David McCullough is a writer, historian, a lecturer, a professor, and he was speaking to a group one day, and he said, you know, my biggest challenge as a historian is convincing my students that there's no such thing as history. No such thing as history. That struck me as an odd observation coming from an historian. But what he meant by that is that there's nothing inevitable, right? What we call history, the grand sweeping narrative that we apply to a series of events from the past, that's just our views that we impose on a series of events. But nobody lives in history. Everybody lives in the present. And what we've decided to look back on and call history, that was the active decision by men and women that led to a series of events. So I would stand here and argue there was never anything inevitable about this country's, even our country's formation, about breaking off the 13 colonies from the greatest power of its time and launching this amazing experiment in self-government and freedom. That wasn't inevitable. That was a conscious and willful decision by some very, very brave, insightful, and brilliant individuals. There was nothing inevitable about this fledgling country going from being a third world colonial backwater to the greatest and most powerful and wealthiest country in the history of the world. That wasn't inevitable. It was a result of conscious and willful decisions. And there was nothing inevitable about America rising time and again in the 20th century and freeing the entire world from the greatest evils we had faced in that time, Nazism and fascism and imperial Japan and communism. That wasn't inevitable. It was conscious decisions made by men and women who wanted it to be that way. So, will we be a free and prosperous society going forward? We will if we decide to be. If we reject the badly flawed policies of the left and embrace the freedom that allowed us to attain what we've attained, then we will continue to have freedom and prosperity. Will we be safe and secure? We will if we decide to be. We need to elect a president who understands America's leadership role in the world and that proper leadership leads to greater security. So, folks, I just feel very, very strongly. We've been through 6 pretty rough years. We've got another, 22 months or so to go. We are still by far and away the greatest nation to ever exist on this planet, the most powerful, the most decent, the most prosperous, the one that has delivered more people out of poverty and elevated the standard of living for more people in a way that no other nation ever has. And our future is entirely within our hands. If we remember and we embrace the fundamental conservative principles that allowed us to achieve the success, the unparalleled success that we've achieved, then the 21st century will just be another great American century. Thank you very much for having me. Have a great conference.